To the point,
yes, now coming to that,
it is inevitable that we're going to see a significantly bigger budget deficit, isn't it?
Kerry, we take this one step at a time. The next point in the process is the budget, which only lies 2 months away, and we will be obviously engaged in complete and sober analysis of the numbers up until then. We've said with the last statement on the state of finances that all the risks are on the downside. Wayne Swan, the Treasurer, was up front about that. I have been as well. And the reason is, this is a global economic cyclone, starting in America, off to Europe, through the rest of the world. What's our strategy? You go to whether we could have done anything different. It's this. You can either seek to prepare people, prepare the country, prepare the economy, put up as many defences as you can against a cyclone, but you know something? You can't actually stop the cyclone from hitting. Mr Turnbull's approach is, don't worry about the defences, let the free market sort it out. And that's letting everyone...
Again, with respect, Mr Rudd, you're oversimplifying Mr Turnbull's responses. He's not saying do nothing. He's saying do it differently. But I'd like to move on.
Well, I'd beg to differ on that because it's difficult each day to know what the Liberals' position is. And I used the example I used before.
Yesterday you laid out the argument that you'll take to the next summit of the G20 in April to isolate the huge bundle of toxic assets preventing the world's biggest banks from getting back to health, getting the money flowing back through the global economy. You say all non-viable banks must be closed. Have you really thought through what that would mean?
Well, the challenge we face right now is, and you and I have just been having a legitimate debate about the forms of fiscal stimulus and their effectiveness. And these are debates happening in every capital around the world. But that's one part of the economic policy dilemma. The biggest part of the global economic policy dilemma is how do you restore the world's biggest banks to health in order to restore global capital flows to anything approaching normality, because that's what directly affects jobs and investment right across the world, including Australia. Therefore, as we lead up to the G20 summit, the big challenge is this. Do you simply push that into the too hard basket, or do you seek to develop a framework with which those governments who are faced with these banks with toxic balance sheets in their jurisdictions to restore those banks to proper health? Part of the problem is, if you have banks, big banks at the moment, in various parts of the world, which have very bad balance sheets, what happens is that the rest of the banking system becomes so suspicious, so lacking in confidence of those banks, that normal interbank credit doesn't flow anymore. But that's part of the problem now. So it's important that the global financial community and those governments responsible for the regulation of these banks cauterise the wound. Otherwise, you'll still have bleeding throughout the global financial system, and that in turn affects the artery of the global economy, which is private credit flows. That's why I argue in this direction.
There are so many banks around the world right now who are only still floating because they're being propped up one way or another by government, or even partially nationalised by government. But is this what you'll be telling President Obama when you see him later this month? All your non-viable banks must be closed. I, Kevin Rudd, believe you've got to close all your non-viable banks.
What I absolutely believe, Kerry, is that whether it is in the United States or in Europe, the UK, Germany, Switzerland, Belgium, Netherlands, this is where we've got a lot of these banks which are domiciled in those countries, which have problems with their balance sheets and represent such a huge slice of global credit, including that which comes here and to our businesses, is that the governments of the world can't just do uncoordinated actions in each national jurisdiction. You know why? Because global financial markets will look at that and say, that's not going to work. Because if you have systems set up in one country which don't properly evaluate the assets of a major bank, say in the United States, against what is perhaps being used as a system in the UK or in Germany, then markets will still vote no in terms of confidence. What they're looking for, markets, is coordination, a common regime of principles, and for governments to act within an agreed time frame. And that's why I believe the G20 has a responsibility to move in the direction of establishing such a framework for all governments to agree to.
A leading market economist in Australia, Saul Eslake, said today that people approaching retirement, say they're 60, perhaps have 5 years to go before they retire, don't stand a chance of making up what they've lost from their savings, from their superannuation investments, their retirement funds, that they're either going to have to work longer or they're just going to have to cop a reduced standard of living in retirement. Is there anything you can say to those people? I mean, you're powerless to help them, aren't you?
I haven't seen Saul Eslake's comments. but I always listen carefully to what he has to say. He's been a close observer and analyst of the Australian economy over a long period of time. Through Nick Sherry, the responsible minister, we are in deep and rolling consultation with the superannuation industry in Australia. This is a period of great stress for that industry and for those depending on retirement schemes based on stock market investments. But you know, the core of the problem in dealing with this is what you and I have just been talking about. You cannot effectively look at a restoration of anything approaching normality in equity markets, stock markets,
but the core
until you get back to the normal flow of credit.
But the core of their problem is the money's gone.
This is a crisis, as I've said before, caused by extreme greed, turbocharged by under-regulated and unrestrained financial markets. The key thing is to get the rules right for the future, but in the meantime, act on the question of restoring banks, global banks, to normal credit flows, and that's why the global agenda here is of core importance if we're to see a return to economic normality in Australia as well.
Very briefly, Ross Garnaut, the architect of your plan to reduce carbon emissions and tackle climate change, said in a speech last night that the economic crisis gives you some breathing space in mitigating climate change, perhaps 2 or 3 years. Given the enormous pressures on business right now, for at least the next year or two, given your desire that you express all the time to protect jobs in this crisis as much as possible, hasn't Professor Garnaut given you the opportunity to now delay and to justify delaying your emissions trading scheme by a year or even 2?
What Ross is obviously pointing to is the fact that global emissions will not grow as much as people thought because global economic activity is now slower than what was thought or concluded by international organisations and others in recent years. Can I say, Kerry, when we framed the carbon pollution reduction scheme, we did so to get the balance right between protecting jobs on the one hand and dealing with the long-term challenge of greenhouse gas emissions.
But the whole economic landscape has changed massively. And you are saying, on the one hand, you're in the game right now to protect jobs, to save jobs. On the other hand, you're being told by business jobs are going to hemorrhage, jobs are going to bleed if you persist in introducing your ETS scheme in 2010.
Kerry, when we framed this through the good work of the Minister, Penny Wong, the challenge was to get the balance right. We were attacked from the left and from the right on this scheme. We believe we have got the balance right. Our intention is to legislate the scheme. We think it's the right long-term strategy for Australia and the planet, but we are very mindful, acutely mindful, of ensuring that we manage the proper protection of jobs on the way through. That's why there is so much built in the scheme to do that.
We're out of time. Kevin Rudd, thanks for talking with us.
Good to be with you.